Lockie, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Kai.
You work with athletes in trying to improve their overall performance in a holistic manner. What are the most common reasons athletes fall short of their potential?
Hmm. Good question. From what I've seen, it all sort of started from my own perspectives of my experiences with sport and my lived experiences with sport, and seeing how not addressing the whole picture of athletic performance by many coaches, not having that addressed by many coaches, kind of probably really impacted my career and stopped me from getting to the levels that I wanted to get to at the time. And those areas would be, the nutrition to a degree that really needs to be addressed to. I think nutrition is at times pretty oversimplified by athletes. Psychology is obviously a huge one. We've got sports psychologists, but I don't know many athletes that go and see a sports psychologist outside of training and their S&C coach and then maybe doing some nutrition. It's like, that's an afterthought. And then also just lifestyle, because, athletes are humans before they're athletes. And to be able to address the areas of their lifestyle that's then going to help their performance, they're sort of the areas that I would see I probably struggled with addressing enough, and I think can be addressed significantly further, that often get overlooked.
No, I think you're completely right there with the sports psychologists. I mean, similar to you, I've played a decent level of sport, and I think I've never met an actual athlete who has gone and seen someone external to the club. So I think you're absolutely on the money there. It's obviously mindset plays a huge role. So when you meet with an athlete who's struggling, what's your starting point? What's the first thing that you look for with an athlete?
Mm. Yeah, great question. So when I start with an athlete, uh, I start with what's called a roadmap call, and it's essentially like the building the foundation. I explain it to athletes as building the foundation of their house that we're going to build together. So, the actual house ends up being the training, the nutrition, the work we do on mindset, all of that side of things, and that's what we build throughout coaching. But the foundation that I like to set is from our roadmap call, and that is they fill out an in-depth questionnaire, and then we go through that together, and I pick things out that I think might be holding them back. And so from that, you can kind of get a gauge once you work with enough athletes. Uh, Areas that just seem a little bit off, and you can kind of, being an athlete myself and working with enough athletes, you can kind of sense the direction that they might be or the areas that they might be struggling in, and where those pressures or areas that they're probably just struggling mentally with are coming from. Whether that's, for example, parental pressure is a huge one, and feeling like they have to live up to their parents' expectations. So working through that and finding where that problem is coming from is sort of the first step in setting that foundation. And I always say to my athletes that you can't really improve something if you don't know what you're trying to improve. So just uncovering it is always the first step in helping an athlete's mindset.
So once sort of the mindset is addressed, you then start to look at the training structure, the recovery, and the nutrition after that. Because obviously, if you don't assess that mindset first, obviously those other things won't fall into place correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely, yes. But it's, I think this is what's so great about coaching, is that it's so individual to each person. Someone like, I have plenty of athletes who I barely talk about psychology with, just because whether they don't, it's just not the main priority for them. Whether, it's just the season that they're in at that time, that psychology may not be the biggest focus. And so it really is an accumulation of all of these aspects, working together at the same time. And I think that's the tricky part about being an athlete, is there's so much to manage. So if they're trying to manage it all on their own, like, no wonder it's overwhelming. And so that's where I like to try and help them build these things all at the same time and keep building things up together, and not try and get overwhelmed with it. But I suppose, yeah, for different people, you know, different things are going to take priority at different times.
Why do you think negativity can drain an athlete's passion for their sport? What strategies do you use to reverse that?
Mm, it's a very good question. There's a few people I follow online, and there's one guy from America who his name is Drake Davis, and he's an awesome. I don't even know if he's a sports psychologist. I don't really know what he does, but he talks a lot about sports psychology. And one of the things he speaks a lot about is treating sport as a childlike play and having a childlike approach to sport, because that's what we do it for when we start playing sport. It's like when you're a kid, you play sport because you love it. And getting back to those roots of loving sport is usually when you perform the best. You know, it's your flow state. It's not really caring if you mess things up. It's just going out, having fun because you love what you're doing. And so the reason I think a lot of athletes get to that point where they stop enjoying it is because of a lot of the pressure they place on themselves. So what I like to do is just simplify sport for people and focus on, the things we can control, focus on uh, getting back to just the way you treated sport as a kid, and finding the joy in doing all the little things, finding the joy in game day and competing again. Again, as I said last time, it is. I wish that there was a one sort of thing to fix everyone's problems, but usually it is very individual, and it takes time to find what what method is going to help each individual athlete kind of rekindle that enjoyment for their sport again.
Yeah, I think you've hit it pretty on the head there. I think when you listen to a lot of these top athletes talk and when they're really performing, they talk about how much they're enjoying their sport, how much they're just kind of delving into it. And obviously, when you start to not enjoy that sport, the negativity of it can be quite draining. I think from that individual as a whole. We want sport and fitness and that lifestyle to be something that people enjoy and want to be a part of, rather than walking away and having a negative experience with that sport. And of course, as you've said, just trying to make people enjoy the sport again instead of turning to coping mechanisms and having to look at sport a different way and having to cope in a different way. It's, to jump on that early, because the coping mechanisms can turn into destructive or negative things in someone's life, such as turning to alcohol or drugs, and that can turn into a super hardcore spiral. Have you seen a lot of your own athletes turn things around after shifting their mindset to that?
Yeah, it's honestly it's probably I'm fortunate because I work with a lot of young athletes and probably just people who haven't maybe gotten to that point yet. And so I wouldn't say I've seen, as drastic of a turnaround yet. I'm sure I'll see it at some point in my coaching career, but I haven't seen that turnaround where it's gone from, being alcoholism, gambling, that side of things, to refinding the love of their sport or whatever the situation might be. But definitely something I talk about a lot is detachment and being able to detach from your sport. And that's exactly what you're talking about there, because the way that people say, Michael Jordan was obsessed with his with his sport, and yes, he was, and he could well be the GOAT of basketball. But the way that he detached from sport was like chronic, uh, substance abuse and gambling and things like that. And, like I'm pretty sure he used to go and play games of golf and put hundreds of thousands of dollars on each game because that was his way to detach from basketball, because he was so obsessed with it. And you actually look at these people who were glorified for being so obsessed with their sport, but a lot of the time they actually didn't really live happy, fulfilled lives because they're just so obsessed with what they do. But then you look at other people who maybe aren't quite, an undisputed GOAT of their sport, but they're they're still really successful, but they actually enjoy their sport and they enjoy their life outside of sport significantly more. And so I think finding ways to escape from your sport at times, especially as you move up and especially as it becomes more pressure, more on the line, you might be getting paid for it. That becomes even more important.
It's a really interesting topic of athletes who are absolutely obsessed, such as, you mentioned Michael Jordan, but other people like Tiger Woods, who had obviously a little bit of a problem with his personal life. Usually, these people that are hyper successful within their sports aren't the most well rounded person. Is that something you explain to your young athletes coming through when trying to sort of speak to them about being balanced? Is look, like some people are hyper focused, but what
Mm,
we're trying to do is look at the whole picture.
definitely, definitely. Yeah. It's something I try and instill in them early that, as I said at the start, you're a human before you're an athlete. And you're only going to be an athlete for a certain amount of your life. Then after that, and throughout that as well, you're still a human, and there's always your life after sport. So you've got to prioritizing that person, because if you can be a better person, then you're probably going to be able to be a better athlete. And so I think coming back to what I was saying before, there's sort of I don't really start with athletes and they're already into these destructive behaviors. So it's probably more of I've got them at a good time where I can instill good habits and beliefs and that side of things into them before they get to that point. And so, for example, a strategy that I use with people is just a hobby. Like having a hobby to be able to get away from your sport is really important. And it's just picking up something that you enjoyed as a kid, or trying new things that you might be able to use to that can just really engage you and take your mind away from being obsessed with what you're doing.
I suppose when athletes identify their whole being and worth with their sport, the pressure can skyrocket at times because you almost look at it and go, well, if I don't perform here, I then feel almost unworthy in other aspects of my life as well. So you're absolutely right. I think time away from the game and realizing there is more to life than just this sport can really make you appreciate the sport and improve focus when you actually return to the field or court or whatever you're trying to do. So yeah, that's a great point on hobbies and getting away from the sport. Talking about sort of getting away from the sport and benefiting it in a non-direct way, how can athletes build confidence away from their sport beyond just practicing drills?
Yeah, great question. I there was a quote I I heard one time. I think it was like Alex Hormozy or someone like that said, "You don't build confidence and belief by just shouting affirmations in the mirror." And so what that means is, let's say, like I still play footy, and I'm not going to think I'm a better kick of the football by just telling myself in the mirror 1,000 times I'm going to be I am a better kick of the football. It's going to come from doing the practice. And whether that's actually kicking the football, whether it's, you know, just knowing that you've done enough work to be good at what you're about to do, whether it's using methods like visualization. And then I think a big part of it is just realizing that, if you do mess something up, it's not the end of the world. And that's where a lot of that pressure comes from. It's, if I mess up this opportunity, it feels like my world's about to end. It feels like this is just the end of everything in existence. But, you look at the best of the best. Something I try and tell my young athletes is everyone makes huge mistakes in their career. Everyone makes huge mistakes in their life. And the best people to have ever done it make these mistakes. And the sooner you can realize that, the sooner you'll probably progress. Another quote that I really like is, if you were 1,000 failures away from your success, how fast would you want to fail? Or 1,000 failures away from where you want to get to, how fast would you want to fail? And that's usually the case. It's usually failure after failure after failure, but along the way, you're building up slowly.
I think I want to touch on positive self-talk? Because I feel like, for someone like yourself and I, coming from a sporting background and then a strength and conditioning background, I feel like we get taught about positive self-talk quite a bit and, not to get sort of dragged down by those failures. But I feel like a lot of athletes coming through, like I see so many young athletes struggle with their self-talk. On the field, they'll make a mistake and they go really into their shell. How can someone start to practice positive self-talk with themselves?
Yeah. Yep. So one method I actually used, a practical thing I used with an athlete this year that helped him really like quite significantly with his performance this year was just bringing your focus back to simplifying things and bringing your focus back to things that you can control. So one thing we did was we thought of three words that were things that he could control within the game of his sport and things that he can bring to the table that no matter whether his opponent outplays him, where his coach has put him on the field, whatever it might be, he can always bring these three words. And I specifically remember his three. It was effort, energy, and intent. Like, no matter what is happening in the game, he can always bring those three things to every single contest, every minute, every quarter, across the whole game. And judging himself off that performance rather than judging himself off how many disposals he got or how many goals he kicked. And so I think, yeah, like you say, self-talk can really be blown up a bit by people saying, oh, you just need to tell yourself that it's all going to be okay. But it's easy to say that. And then you get onto the field and you don't believe that in the moment. So I think for anyone who's watching this, if you're a young athlete and you do struggle with that, try simplifying your game to things that you can control and focusing on just bringing those every opportunity possible.
I think personally for myself, it was always having a mental checklist of just doing things correctly, whether that's to the lead up or in the first bit of the game of, look, warm up correctly, that's a tick. Hit your kick during a warm up, that's a tick. And just those small little momentum boosters. I think it's such a shame that we get to a point where you're coming to probably the end of your, and unfortunately, like myself, towards the end of your semi-professional career, only in your early 20s. And these sort of things that I've learnt, I didn't know when I was younger. So I think it's really important for those young athletes to realize and start practicing that as early as you can, because that's just going to set you up for so much success in your sport, but then also in life when you sort of run into a hard time, like before we mentioned, those top athletes. I have no doubt that they kind of use that same mental framework to get themselves out of a bad spot within their lives. You also, obviously, you're a holistic athlete coach. Talk to me about gut health, because gut health isn't something most athletes really think about. So, how do you explain this concept to me of gut health?
Hmm. Yeah. Gut health is it's a very popular buzzword or term that's thrown around online at the moment. There's lots of gut health coaches and people always speak about gut health, and it's it can be a really complex topic. I think to simplify it, and I'm by no means I am anywhere near an industry expert on this topic. There's people who know significantly more than me about this, so uh, take it with a grain of salt. But I would say that to simplify it for athletes who might just want to help their performance through their gut health, our gut essentially helps us break down and absorb the nutrients that we're eating. So if your gut health is not up to standard, not where it should be, then we're not going to be absorbing as many of the nutrients that we eat in our food. And that could mean that we lead to nutrient deficiencies, which nutrient deficiencies can then lead us to things like poor performance, getting sick easier, getting injured easier, because the nutrients that you're eating in your food are basically helping these systems to keep our body functioning at an optimal level as possible. As athletes, we also absolutely beat up our gut. Like there's multiple studies showing how endurance training and high intensity training and just basically training hard will damage your gut, whether it's the lining of your gut, whether it's the microbiome of your gut. And so it is really important to actively stay on top of your gut health and just work to keep your gut healthy through it can be pretty simple. A few things that I like to use with athletes are some food sources will be bone broth is a great one for the integrity of your gut lining. And that's a really easy one that people can eat pretty much every day to help with the population of your gut microbiome. So basically the gut bacteria that help to absorb these nutrients. We want to be eating some pre and probiotic foods. So whether that's sourdough, whether it's yogurt, whether it's sauerkraut and kimchi or kefir, these more fermented foods can help to keep that gut healthy. And so I think there's just some really basic practical things that we can do most of the time that you can build into a sustainable routine to keep your gut, functioning relatively well.
I suppose from a practical standpoint, you have to think about the gut health, and obviously your GI tract and everything is the thing that absorbs your nutrients. If we can improve that sort of environment, it'll improve any energy availability and through that cause and effect improve recovery as well. So definitely something that I think young athletes should look at. Like you just said, I mean, if it's impacting athletes as bad as what you're saying it is, and as in these studies, then I think that's probably the next sort of industry thing, wouldn't it be, to look at your GI tract?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's only going to get more and more popular. It's pretty common, like commonly spoken about now, especially throughout, like gut health coaches and things. You'll see it spoken about online that the gut is responsible for so much in the body. I believe there's research coming out that, your mental health is basically directly impacted by your gut health. If your gut health is poor, it can really impact your mental health. Like we said, recovery, immune system, hormones, and energy levels. So all these things are really important to athletes. And I think, as you say, it's just going to get more popular as we go on. That people in general, but also athletes, will start to focus on these important things that are pretty often overlooked.
I think we'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't have a brief sort of chat around strength and conditioning as well. If a parent is listening to this or an athlete is listening to this and they're currently kind of holding back from weight training out of fear of injury, what would you recommend or say to them to sort of push them in the direction of doing some sort of resistance training?
Really good question. I think one of the simplest things you can do is like, I think people just get into this idea of with anything, it's like whether it's coaching with someone, whether it's, a subscription service, whether it's like whatever it might be, is that you're locked into something forever. And so what I would say is like, just go and try the gym, try getting coached by a good strength and conditioning coach. If it's a parent with a young kid, just like get them to do 3 sessions. If they hate it, if they're getting injured, like you can always stop. But all you need to do now is do a simple Google search, put it in Chat GPT, look on some research papers, and it's just undisputed that strength training is going to help you as an athlete. I believe there's even research that it helps like chess players with their performance. So like, I think, if it's helping a chess player with their performance, there's no doubt that it's going to help footy or soccer or basketball or an endurance athlete or whatever it might be. And I think the other thing you can do is just look to some of the leading countries in the world for their what they do for their training. I always, and most S&C coaches will go back to America because it's just they're so far ahead of us in Australia with strength and conditioning. And you look at how football players, basketball players, you look at how all the sports over there, soccer, lacrosse, they all will train in the gym all year round, multiple sessions a week, and it's just an absolute staple in their sport. And no one doesn't do it because it's just accepted how important it is. So I think, yeah, to come back to your original question, I would say just try it. There's nothing really to lose, and I guarantee that you will perform better if you do get in the gym sooner.
Like you said, don't. Well, I suppose a better way to put it is have a trial season with it. Is get in the gym during the preseason and see if it does improve your performance, because I can almost guarantee you it will. And like you said, it can help with a lot of other things like chess players, but with their mindset, but also just any form of long health contraindication will dramatically decrease with exercise. So I think it's a fantastic thing for young athletes to do for their sport, but I think it sets them up well for the rest of their life to live an active, healthy lifestyle.
Agreed. I'll add on that, and that's, going back to that point of like athletes being humans as well, is yes, everything might feel like, or your athletic career might feel like everything now, but it's only going to take you 5 or 10 years down the track, and you're going to be like starting to think about the rest of your life. And the fact that you've been an athlete already is significantly going to help you later in life. And the fact that you've kept it going for this long, but just these little habits you build are amazing, as you say, for general health later in life.
Speaking about sort of styles of training, why do you think mental training is often undervalued compared to physical training?
Hmm, that's a good question. I would say, I think because no one, you can't see mental training, you can see physical training. And you probably have to speak to someone to understand, an elite athlete to understand the mental training that they would do. And and I don't know about you, but I don't speak to, or growing up, I didn't speak to elite athletes almost ever. So to have a one-on-one conversation and ask an elite athlete about that is pretty unlikely to happen. But as a young person, I could see that my favorite footy players were training a lot physically. And so I think it's just also longer been accepted that that's how you get to that level. And so I think it is something that is going to keep coming up, like gut health is, the mental side of performance. But I think it's just physically an easier thing to see, that and an earlier accepted thing that people, all athletes train physically. It's like, obviously, like, how do they get there? But it's not as accepted that all athletes train their brain to perform better as well.
Do you think there's a stigma around practices like meditation and yoga and that mental side of things still with young athletes?
Yeah, I would say actually it's probably more people around our age, and maybe even 5 or 10 years older, that I
Mhm.
think that's where the stigma would be. I think young athletes coming through are very open and accepting to things. Um, I actually did a post the other day. It was it was literally just a video of me meditating from one of my mentorship retreats, and it I just put the text on it was, "Is this gay?" Because that's how I probably would have spoken about it, and that's how the insult for it would have been 10 years ago. Would have been, "Oh, meditation's so gay." But I explained in the caption that I think that's sort of, it's evolving to be something that is more popular now, and you probably only need to go and speak to 10 high performing athletes and realize how much of that stuff they do: meditation, visualization, mindfulness, maybe working with a sports psychologist. And I think it is something that's going to, again, just keep getting more popular because it is just getting spoken about more.
I think people think the successful people don't struggle with the mental side of life, but they do struggle. But the only difference is that they win because they have those systems in place to come out the other side. And it's doing things that you don't necessarily want to do, but doing them anyway, such as those meditations, those yogas, everything that's going to set you up better in order to take that on.
Yeah, I know back in when I was peak obsessed with footy and just, like wanted to make it more than anything. Like I think I meditated for every day for like 2 or 3 years straight or something. And I can't even explain how much it helped my ability to stay composed. Probably more notice it in life, but being able to respond to something and not react to something and stay composed in situations by just spending 5 minutes a day sitting with my breath, getting guided through some meditation, and and taking that time to develop that important muscle.
Lockie, before we wrap up, is there one piece of advice you'd give to athletes who feel stuck?
I would say there's probably a couple little pieces that I think a lot of a lot of kids feel like they just need to do more and more and more work. And I know that's how people feel because I speak to kids, I speak to a lot of young athletes like daily. But I was also in that situation. And so I'd probably just say if something that I've been preaching a lot to my athletes recently is like quality work over quantity work is almost always going to be more beneficial when you're trying to develop physically, mentally, whatever it might be. And that would be not going out and just smashing yourself in a running session because you feel like you need to do more than the next person. It's getting a well-structured program and having specific things that you're working towards and just executing that to a really good standard and then just doing that really consistently. I think that's probably the next point is that most people will fail because they'll just stop. They're not going to fail because they just simply worked forever and weren't good enough. And playing that long game, I think, is something that's really crucial. And then I think the last point to kind of tie those together is if people are as serious about getting to that level as they say they are, because it's easy to say, yeah, I really want to get drafted or I really want to go pro or whatever it might be. If you're actually serious about that, I think nothing will really stand in the way of making that happen. And whether that's, you know, investing in a coach or whether it's showing up to every possible opportunity that you're given to get better or whether it's just ticking off all the training that you've got, I think it's really easy to say something, but then it's a lot harder to actually do the thing just over and over and over again, especially when you don't want to.
Lockie, you've been fantastic, mate. There's so much valuable insight that I know will help athletes and give them plenty to think about moving forward. Where can people connect with you or learn about your work?
Yeah. So, Coach Kennett on Instagram, coach_Kennett, probably the best spot. Of my website, coachkennett.com. They're probably the best two spots. If I always say to people, if you ever have a question, like please reach out. Most of the people or a lot of the people I speak to are in positions that I used to be in. And so genuinely just want to help young athletes just get out of those positions that they might be struggling in at the moment and see them succeed. And so whether it's just a question that might guide you in the right direction or whatever, please reach out. Instagram's probably the best spot. And yeah, happy to help.
Beautiful, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Kai. Appreciate it.